Well, when we start, turns out we're pretty good. Well, Oscar Piastri is at least with an incredible race on the weekend, but we're not going to start there. I want to first highlight a massive congratulations to Fernando Alonso and his partner, Melissa Jimenez, on the birth of their first baby, leading into Suzuka. Wonderful milestone for them. Super pleased. It's great news, and it's the sort of thing we should celebrate. So, getting into the recap for the Japanese Grand Prix, though, what an incredible weekend of racing, filled with some really intriguing movements from a development perspective, but also in relation to the regulations and some of the fallout and the drama that's occurred over the course of the weekend. So let's get into it. Kimi Antonelli, great race from him. Back-to-back poles, back-to-back wins, youngest in history to ever do it. He's really showing some great maturity over the last few weeks in particular, and it's causing a headache for George Russell. I will call out some of the negativity towards George. That's not okay. It's just racing. These things happen. Things went back and forth between Lando and Oscar last year. Some really bad things came out of the fandom in that space as well. Just accept what's happened, move on. There's no need to attack the drivers at all in any of this. So, that's. I'll continue to call it out when I see it online. I think everyone else should as well. I would encourage everyone else to call it out when you see it. There's no need for it. Support your driver as much as you can. They're doing the best that they can. They're not deliberately ruining things or all the rest of it. And yes, you may not agree with particular driver stances on things. Again, there is no need to be bullying or harassing or anything like that about it either. So accept what's happened, take it, move on, and go from there. But coming back to Kimi, an incredible weekend for him. Super pleased for him to now be the youngest championship leader in history. Do I think that there was a bit of luck in that safety car? 100%. Ruth Buscombe shared a piece in the last 24 hours talking about the strategy, how pitting when they did, McLaren basically failed in their strategy from an observations perspective. So the pit wall for McLaren reacted with Piastri. He was actually getting quicker based on the data that Ruth shared. So there was actually no need for him to pit. If they had kept him out rather than reacting to Mercedes, then I think, based on the way Oscar was driving, the way he was managing his tyres, and the fact that he actually started to pull away from George after those first 1.5 dozen laps, so those 18 laps, I think we could have had a McLaren on the top step of the podium rather than another Mercedes. So let's see how we go moving on from here. But yeah, the key thing for me out of this weekend, observation-wise, is McLaren showed huge improvements from a pace perspective. If you look across FP1 through 2 and then qualifying, 1, 2, and 3, and then qualifying, yes, there were some bigger gaps in there, but on the whole, McLaren and Ferrari, for that matter as well, were generally at least 0.2 closer to Mercedes. Whether Mercedes were holding something in the bag over those practice sessions, I'm not quite sure. But they definitely don't have as much a gap on one lap pace as they did over the first two races in Australia and then China. So it'll be intriguing to see how the development goes over the next 5 weeks with the cancellations of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And then the introduction of the Aduo side as well. So the additional development opportunities that are coming down range. And the long and short of that is basically the FIA testing against the Mercedes power unit, which on the whole is the tip of the spear or the best performing engine so far this year. And then they'll apply that baseline to all the other teams, and if they're not within the 4%, then there's additional opportunities for those teams to apply developments and upgrades and see how closer that they can get to basically allow closer racing and not have such a big gap between first and last, which we have seen some big ones. Kimi pulled away to a 15-second or almost 15-second win on the weekend. Again, I think that is more indicative of how well the Mercedes car performs in clean air rather than anything else, which you would come to expect anyway. So, yeah, 5-week break until Miami. There's going to be a huge amount of development. We'll cover off some of the teams and what I expect in that space as we continue on. But I think Mercedes should be concerned. I think there is definitely some big improvements coming for McLaren and Ferrari, the former of those two in particular. First time out for Oscar and getting a podium. So lots of work in that space. I'm really intrigued to see what happens. And I'm really intrigued to see what comes of the meetings between the FIA after their statement that was released post the Japanese Grand Prix. They're holding discussions with the teams, stakeholders, drivers, etc., across the next 5 weeks to see what potential changes to regulations may be made. They've not said anything about actually making changes. It's more about engaging stakeholders to see how they can improve things if they can. I think we all agree that there are changes that potentially should be made, particularly in light of the Ollie Behrman incident, and I think it's a shame that is what is the catalyst. Unfortunately, it tends to be the way it goes in life is we don't see regulatory bodies make changes until they have a catalyst, rather than listening to the people on the ground living those situations on a day-to-day basis and being able to foresee those outcomes. So let's see how we go. I'm excited. Not so much about the 5-week break, but what changes and what developments are going to occur prior to Miami and what that's going to bring with it. Jumping into my main man, Oscar. I'm still riding the high of the P2 for him. He has been an absolute superstar this year, despite the fact that he's only just completed his first race in the third round of the year. So, and the reason I highlight that is for those that have been following along from the start, you'll note that my commentary during the Bahrain testing and the Australia and China recaps, I've highlighted Oscar's performances in a way that, it might seem a bit parochial and biased, and I'm happy to acknowledge that there is definitely some there, but I think he more broadly has been performing better than the reigning world champ. He has well and truly been on top of the car. He outpaced Lando and 90% of the field during testing. He outpaced Lando in qualifying in Australia, China, and now Japan as well. And for those of you that love their statistics, this is the first time that Lando has lost 3 consecutive qualifying sessions since 2019, back when Carlos Sainz was his senior, more experienced teammate. So that is a huge indication of how well Oscar is performing right now. And Andrea Stellard has come out and sung Oscar's praises in the last 24 hours as well. So I think for McLaren, if they can give him the car again, he will be far more experienced than he was last year going into the title fight. He's already up to P6 after 1 complete Grand Prix this year, finishing on that podium. He has consistently shown throughout all of the practice sessions that he can be at the top or very near to the top. So I think he just reinforced that point I made earlier about Mercedes needing to be worried about McLaren, specifically Oscar Piastri. I have concerns about Lando. He seems disinterested. He's highlighted a number of times now points on the regulations and how he feels about them. Going so far now as to be apathetic with the media and speaking that there's no point in highlighting anything because they just worry the FIA and Formula One, and I'm assuming by extension Formula One's owners, Liberty Media, only care about the fans. And there's nothing wrong with caring about the fans. I'm one of them. There needs to be a balance. You need to, if the sport isn't fun for the athletes, you're not going to get people coming through. It still needs to be enjoyable for the fans. And I'll speak to the fan side a bit later on because there's a lot of talk going in that as well. So, I have concerns about Lando. I posted earlier in the year about him being potentially a delayed Nico Rosberg in terms of retiring at the end of this year. So, not being a one and done, but a one and half done in terms of completing the 2026 season and then going, you know what, I'm out. On top of that, he's got car reliability issues, specifically the battery side. He's already had to change 2, meaning he's now on his last one. If he has to have another change, that is an automatic penalty, automatic grid penalty, something that McLaren, I think, will be hoping to avoid through understanding what's going on with the other 2 and whether or not they can remediate that through repairs and not having to go to another brand new battery. So I would expect that they'll be engaging Mercedes from a manufacturing perspective and getting as much data as they can to try and remediate that and not have to bring in a 4th battery and accept grid penalties and things like that. So, I think for Lando, he's definitely struggling a bit at the moment, both for pace, both for car reliability, and I think for interest and enjoyment. Max is another one. I'll talk to that a bit later because there's a lot to unpack there. Keeping the Oceania lad theme, I want to jump onto Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad. So that's a really intriguing battle for me. Those 2 boys have been back and forth all year. Relatively even. Liam seems to have just nudged Arvid in terms of the number of qualifying. Managed to beat him overall for race pace the last 3 outings. 2 out of the 3 outings, Australia aside. So China and Japan, Liam's got the better of Arvid. I think Liam needs to probably really start taking a look at where he can improve because Arvid Lindblad seems to have a significant amount of pace and is not unwilling to use it. So if Liam doesn't continue to show that development, find some extra pace, we could see some issues for him in the back end of the season. But on the other side of the coin, for Racing Bulls, they are performing as well, almost as well as their senior team. Red Bull struggling again with their own powertrain and things like that. So for me, the positive for Racing Bulls is that they're at least consistent with their senior team. And Liam continues to show that he's outpaced or beaten his previous teammates in almost all the races, if not qualifying as well, in terms of Isaac Hadjar and Yuki Tsunoda. So there's a positive there for Liam, but I think he needs to be careful about how his performances continue to go. I think he has the talent and the skills to be a good Formula One driver. I would expect if Red Bull can sort out the powertrain issues and a number of other areas for them, particularly things like rear grip and the battery management side, this year, you could see Liam Lawson on the podium. It's on my bingo card, so fingers crossed that comes through. Right. Speaking of challenges or battles, inter-team battles, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. Spoke about it during the China recap. The sprint in particular was quite interesting to watch for those 2, and they had some moments during the Grand Prix itself. Not so much during Suzuka this time. There was 1 or 2 moments that stood out, but nothing huge. Whether or not that is I see that rather as a case of just race pace difference rather than inter-team battles. So previously it was a lot closer between Charles and Lewis, particularly in China. A lot of alongside driving battles and things like that, whereas this time in Japan, they just didn't have that proximity to each other to really engage. But there still seems to be some stuff bubbling along on the surface around intra-team rivalry between the two drivers. I can't see it getting too malicious, but it's definitely something that Fred Vasseur and the team need to keep an eye on and see what they can do to ensure that their drivers remain amicable, because they're in with a chance of winning the Constructors. They're certainly keeping Mercedes on their toes. And if they don't keep the drivers in line, they're going to find themselves run down by McLaren in the back end of the year and potentially falling to P3, which is not what they want. Speaking of Constructors, Audi have been blowing my socks off from the day I started watching them in testing. A lot of people will be wondering why, because they've only really scored a couple of points. But the key thing for my mind is that they are a first-year manufacturer, and they are consistently getting into Q2 and then sometimes into Q3 as well. They were unlucky again with the safety car over the weekend that forced they lost track position because of the safety car, and ended up being just outside the points. But they've definitely got straight line pace. Nico Hülkenberg set the speed track record for the race itself, not in general, or not the track record, but the race pace record of 350 Ks over the weekend. So Audi definitely have the speed there, and they're starting to get on top of their reliability issues as well. So I think as we move into Miami, I'm almost willing to put Audi as P5 for in the Constructors this year, if they can continue to show the improvement that they are. It'll be difficult. I think Haas has probably got the actual seat sewn up in that space right now, but it comes down to consistency for them as well. And, Esteban Ocon hasn't been lighting the world on fire. Ollie Behrman has been driving great so far this year, and we'll get to his crash in a minute, but definitely think Audi is on the up and up, and I would love to see them getting another couple of podiums, if not finishing, in the P4 to P7 range quite consistently. Constructors that aren't doing great is Williams. Really disappointing, I think, for a lot of Williams fans, but also for the team in general. I think there's a lot of frustration there between Carlos and Alex Albon's been relatively vocal in his way so far this year. The frustration, I think, from a fan perspective is that it seems to be, certainly across the first three races so far, that the commentary is the same coming out of the team headquarters in terms of, we know we're doing ABC, X, Y, Z, but it's always the same things. The messaging has been consistent, which I suppose is positive, but it's not answering questions. Whether or not they're willing to do that, I don't know. James Vowles has highlighted a number of times that he's got concerns about the cost cap side of things, but a lot of people are highlighting that, you stopped development last year to move into 2026 development, and we're not seeing the benefit of that. So how does Williams fix it? I don't know. Their weight issue continues to plague them. It is anywhere between 14 and 24 kilos. We haven't been told specifically what that number is. I don't expect that Williams will come out and tell us what that number is, but when you're 24 kilos heavier than everyone else on the grid, it's, several tenths that you're going to be behind from the weight perspective. So, and then you've got to add your fuel and all that sort of stuff on as well. So it's going to be difficult for them to get back to P5 in the constructors this year. For me, Williams is probably sitting P7 realistically, and that is only because Aston Martin and Cadillac are struggling for pace. Certainly Aston Martin for finishing a race, Cadillac for pace. So great to see Cadillac finish with both drivers again, though. Yes, outside the points, but they're slowly getting on top of their reliability issues, similar to Audi in that regard. It's now for them trying to figure out where they can find pace and build up with their two highly experienced and highly capable drivers. I would love to see Checo or Valtteri pick up a points finish at some point this year, but I think it's unlikely. I think they believe it's unlikely. See how we go. Right. Speaking of drivers, I want to start with Ollie Behrman's crash. So if you haven't seen it, have a look at the footage. It's pretty hectic, and you need to start watching from where Ollie comes up from behind Franco Colapinto, coming up into Spoon. Huge burst of battery. Colapinto, on the other hand, had his exhausted. So there was a roughly 50k difference in speed. That seems to have caught Ollie out. He's gone to overtake, for lack of a better word, hit the grass, lost grip, gone sideways, and you can see from Colapinto's onboard footage how fast Ollie Behrman was going by the sheer pace that he still has on him, moving laterally towards the fence and the tires. So, still moving that fast that the car hit the barrier with a 50G force, which is absolutely huge. And it's no wonder that Ollie got out and was hurt. Glad that he's okay. Sad that it was the catalyst for the FIA to finally say, okay, maybe we do need to look at these battery regulations and how they're deployed and things like that. And if you're not tracking with the management of the battery, it's a dual prong approach. So sometimes the drivers can control certain aspects in terms of when to deploy, to overtake and things like that. There are also times where the teams can control it from the pit wall in terms of forcing it to be held in abeyance and in order to avoid situations where they overtake or get overtaken and can leave themselves with enough battery to re-overtake, which is why we have that yo-yoing that has been mentioned before. Lando's being overtaken, I think it was either by Lewis or Kimi Antonelli, is a really good example of that. And I'd have to find the footage to go back over it. But as he's coming into that final chicane, used the battery to get through. Didn't have enough to manage it on the exit. Got overtaken straight away. Oscar did the same thing to George Russell. However, Oscar was harvesting himself in that instance. So difference between individual management versus the pit wall side in that case. So a lot to consider for the FIA from purely a battery perspective. I have heard that there are some ideas about how it could be done, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later in a news segment that we've got at the end. What I will lead into, though, is a lot of people, both fans and drivers, and some of the teams, to a lesser extent, have been quite vocal about their concerns with the regulations. Obviously, the likes of Toto Wolff and Mercedes are not going to be saying bad things because they're absolutely dominating right now. Toto has come out in the last 24 to 48 hours and highlighted that he thinks that these new sets of regulations are the greatest, paraphrasing here, but greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't know if I agree with that and his stance that it is racing. There are some elements to it. Yes, It has created some excitement factors here and there, but the frustration is that it is the Mario Kart analogy is really clever. It is tantamount to Mario Kart mushrooms. So, guys are hitting their mushroom, and it might be a case where they've got the gold mushroom and they're hitting that button for a while, mistiming when they're launching said mushroom, whether that's them or in conjunction with their race engineer on when to hit launch on that, and they're failing before they get to the end. The other side of the coin is, you've got drivers going through 130R in Suzuka at 270 k's an hour, as opposed to what we would expect to see of 320 to 330 kilometers an hour, or you've got drivers that are still pedal to the floor down the main straight and dropping 50 k's an hour. That in and of itself is an issue. Second to that is the safety issues that it causes in my mind as well, because if that happens unexpectedly, you're going to find more situations like that. One with Ollie Behrman and Franco Colapinto. So really need the FIA to sit down and actually listen in this space. And it probably could have been avoided or somewhat mitigated if they started listening when things or concerns about these regulations were being raised after they were first announced in 2023, i.e. Max Verstappen. And I know a lot of people are concerned about the way he's going about it, or that he's going to leave. And I'll speak to that in a minute. But, when you've got one of the greatest minds in the sport highlighting that there are significant concerns from his side, it's not just a whinge. And as far as I see it, he's actually being vindicated by some of the actions that are now being taken. He's being vindicated by some of the incidents that have occurred and the way we're watching the sport in terms of drivers pedal to the floor and losing speed, or they're adjusting their gear ratios or downshifting early so that, they can actually maintain speed, which boggles the mind. My concern though with Max isn't so much that he has been vocal. I think that's a really good thing. I like the fact that he's coming out and being vocal about things needing to change, and it's actually sparking some of the other drivers to say the same. Carlos Sainz over the weekend has come out and said similar. Charles Leclerc has been a voice of support in that space as well. Lando, I mentioned earlier, has had mixed commentary, but he's now at a point where he's apathetic in terms of his own ability to perform with the car, because it's just not fun to drive, to paraphrase what he's been saying. So I'm 100% in support of Max in this instance. Yes, he has made some potentially controversial comments around, if fans enjoy the current regulations and that don't know the racing. I think from a technical perspective, he's probably right. From a pure watch perspective, it's hard to say. There have been some enjoyable moments to watch on track. Not so much when you're seeing George Russell, as an Oscar Piastri fan, watching him dive into the chicane at Suzuka, that final chicane, to overtake Oscar was a fantastic move, purely let down because his battery wasn't there. It's not Formula E. We're not meant to be doing that in terms of worrying about battery management and all that sort of jazz. It's Formula One. If you want to go hybrid, I have no concerns with that or no issues with that. Bring back. We've got to figure out a way to go forward without battery management being the deciding factor, rather than a driver's skill set or ability to manage the car in a way that, they can pull a Danny Rick and brake late, get in front, and still achieve a wonderful exit from there. So do I think Max is going to leave the sport, as has been hinted at? yes, I think he will go. He has indicated a number of times how much he's enjoying things like the Nürburgring in the GT3 space, pulling a win despite the later disqualification on his first official race there is huge. The guy just wants to race, and he wants to race purely. And right now, for that, it doesn't feel like it for him. So, I don't think it feels like that for a lot of the drivers. Those that aren't being as vocal, I think, are just being political about it. From a fan perspective, do I think it's driving fans away? Some, yes. Others, no. There's always going to be a balance. The regs change quite a lot throughout the years. Some have stayed, some have gone. It really comes down to how much you're enjoying the sport. If you're enjoying it, great. If not, there's nothing stopping you from going away and then coming back or just, sitting on the fringes and supporting your team and your driver and things like that as well. So, yeah. Which brings me into the segment that I mentioned earlier. I want to start taking on some things from all the followers that listen. Hey, follow along in Instagram or YouTube or whatnot. So, I've got a new segment now, which I'll do at the end of each recap, known as community questions. I've got 3 this week. The first one is from the fastest Yap. So thank you for that. And it relates to the regulations. I'm just going to continue on with that discussion right now. So their question was, what changes to the regulations would I make? I'm not a hugely technical person when it comes to the regulation side, but the one idea that I have seen that could help fix things is bringing back the MGU K or H. I can't remember which one. I'd actually have to double check, but I have seen that idea raised a couple of times, and it makes sense in my mind to do that. It helped with the turbo issues under the last regulations. You could still maintain the 50-50 split from a hybrid perspective. So you're not going to be having the turbo spooling issues at the start, and potentially it could solve the clipping issues when it comes to the battery. So clipping is the battery being exhausted, and the clipping itself refers to the noise that gets made, but it's also aligned with the speed, the massive speed drop that occurs once the battery is exhausted and it starts to harvest energy as you're heading along. So, sorry, I can't really answer your question 100% in that space, but there's a number of ideas that have been thrown around from teams and fans and all the rest of it. So I think the MGU side is probably where they can definitely look at and see how they can target it from there. To follow on the regulation side, the next question is from Accessible Racing Life. So thank you, Rach, for your submission there. Her question relates to regulations in terms of how long do I think it will take for teams to get on top of said regulations. How long is a piece of string? Double half its length. I think there'll be a lot of development over the next 5 weeks leading into Miami. Will that mean that all the teams get on top of the regulations in that time? I don't think so. Aston Martin is certainly not going to be on top of it by the time we get to Miami. Honda have made huge changes to their F1 department leading into this year, and they just don't have the experience. So I would suggest that this year will probably be a development year for a lot of teams, unfortunately. And then come 2027, most, if not all, should be on top of where they need to be. And the final question is from Lex Naturali around the manufacturers and their customer teams. And the question was, why are the customer teams so far behind the manufacturers when they've got the same power unit? And it's a really intriguing question for those that may not have a fully technical understanding of the sport, and that's okay. I'm probably on the partial side. I like the technical piece, but I haven't dived deep into it. So for me, the best way to explain it is that if we look at someone like Mercedes with McLaren, Williams, and Alpine as customer teams, all three customer teams, different levels or different parts of the grid. Williams obviously at the back. Alpine are definitely sitting in the upper part of the midfield right now, and then McLaren's obviously sitting P3 in the constructors, and I suspect that they'll continue to climb in that space. So the thing for Mercedes as the manufacturer is they are building their car around that power unit. They have all the access, all the information, all the data, and they're only providing whatever they need to provide to their customer teams. So all the aero and things like that for the vehicle itself, the chassis itself, is being developed in conjunction with the power unit. So they're at a massive advantage, whereas your customer teams like McLaren, Alpine, and Williams are having to design their chassis almost in absentia of the power unit, and just hoping that the power unit plugs and plays in the way that they expect it to based off the data that they're receiving from the manufacturing team. Another way to look at it is in the commercial vehicle industry, you have partnerships all the time. So the example I used when discussing this with Lex was the Kia. So Kia, the brand, produced a sports saloon here in Australia called the Stinger. Great little car, but it was done in conjunction with BMW, as far as I understand. But the powertrain, again, was done by BMW. Kia built the car around that. Things like fuel efficiency and all that sort of stuff aren't going to be as good as it could have been for Kia if they had let's say, had the BMW guys building the powertrain with Kia in the factory at the same time, and they're all using that data simultaneously. Again, it's a case of plug and play and hope it works. It's a bit more in depth than that, but that's essentially how it would be. So I hope that answers your question. This is a great little segment. I really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to getting some more questions over the next 5 weeks. I'm definitely going to be jumping in weekly podcast still whilst there's the break. There's plenty of stuff to get involved in, whether it's news. I'm hoping to have a couple of special guests on and do some interviews over the next 5 weeks as well, both in terms of some key people in the sport, particularly from an Australian perspective, so other Australian creators, but potentially some up-and-coming Australian drivers as well. And will hopefully get us through the next 5 weeks without waking up and having a nightmare that we can't watch Formula One. But another option that you might have if you're looking for something different over the next 5 weeks is the Australian V8 Supercars, or the Supercar Championship as it's now known, have just released a whole host of archival races on YouTube. 400 races plus, as far as I understand. And if you've never watched it, it's a fantastic little series to get involved in. It's the pinnacle of Australian motorsport, so to speak. Something I used to watch as a kid, sitting down watching Bathurst from sun up to sundown type thing, and going from there. So it's a real Australian rite of passage in the motorsport space. Jump on board, get involved, and for those of you in Brisbane, you've got the Ipswich and Gold Coast races coming up in August and October, respectively. So thanks very much for listening today. Send through any questions that you may have to the Instagram at The Second Seat, or through to my email, which is thesecondseatf1@gmail.com, and we'll get that jumped in for the next program. But for now, thanks for listening. Hope to see you soon. Cheers.